Good morning and welcome to today's devotion. We are looking at the book of Exodus and we are in chapter 12, verses 1 to 4. The Lord said to Moses and Aaron in the land of Egypt, "This month shall mark for you the beginning of months. It shall be the first month of the year for you. Tell the whole congregation of Israel that on the 10th of this month they are to take a lamb for each family, a lamb for each household. If a household is too small for a whole lamb, it shall join its closest neighbour in obtaining one. The lamb shall be divided in proportion to the number of people who eat it." We then go to verse 11. "This is how you shall eat it: your loins girded, your sandals on your feet, and your staff in your hand, and you shall eat it hurriedly. It is the Passover of the Lord. For I will pass through the land of Egypt that night, and I will strike down every firstborn in the land of Egypt, both human beings and animals, on all the gods of Egypt. I shall execute judgments. I am the Lord. The blood shall be a sign for you on the houses where you live. When I see the blood, I will pass over you, and no plague shall destroy you when I strike the land of Egypt." This passage tells us about the first ever Passover, which is a festival that Jesus celebrated with his disciples and is still celebrated today by Jews all over the world. We read this at a time when Moses was asking Pharaoh to let his people go, but he wouldn't change his mind. So this was the final plague to Egypt. God had a plan for his chosen people, the Israelites, and gave clear instructions so that his will would be fulfilled through the Israelite people. God gives us specific tasks of things that must be done in order to fulfill his promise and to fulfill his blessing. In this passage, God clearly sets out the when, the who, the how, and the why of exactly what they need to do. He says you must take a 1-year-old lamb or a goat that is unblemished. He then also explains you must have your loins girded, which means you must be fully dressed and ready, with your sandals on and your walking stick in hand. He explains the hows and the wheres of what they need to do to specifically follow God's plan. He explains they must eat their meal hurriedly, then place blood over their doorframe so that God will pass over. What is clear is that God requires obedience to do exactly what he asks us to do. If the Israelites had not followed the instructions correctly, then God would have not passed over and their eldest son would have been killed. This is a story of humility, of the Israelite people humbly following their God to follow obediently what he asked of them. Throughout the Bible, we see time and time again of stories of how God's obedience calls us to a higher calling and to a deeper place. God gave instructions to Noah about how to build the boat. He was really clear. He said, use cedar wood. He said how big to use it, how long. And it took over a year for Noah to build that boat. He started to build even before it started to rain. He obediently followed God's plan, even though it seemed weird and odd. This is a humble example that we should follow and not question. To obediently do what God asks us to do, even if it seems extraordinary or out of the ordinary. We need to acknowledge that God is an infinite God and put our own agenda aside and humbly follow him. Often we think it's okay to follow the rules, sort of. It's okay to gossip as long as it's just with one friend. Or, oh my goodness, it's okay to get angry with that one person because my goodness, they drive me crazy. Or it was okay to be lazy and not actually do all my work hours because, no one will find out. But God calls us to a higher place. He calls us to fulfill his plans, to be obediently following him, doing exactly what he calls us to do. Jesus is such an example of this. In the Garden of Gethsemane, he knew what was required of him as he prayed to his Father in heaven. He knew that he obediently and humbly needed to follow exactly what God had called him to do, leading to death on a cross. God may not be speaking to us today so clearly as to go build a boat or to kill a lamb and smear it above our doors. But he gave us his word. He gave us the Bible, which tells us how to live and which we can use as a guide to live obedient lives, following the Holy Spirit's guidance, which leads to blessing, holiness, and intimacy, and the fullness of the Easter story.